The Princess of Waterfall Castle, written by Pamela Causey Stanforth, published by Westbow Press. Here's a little of Chapter 1. The cottage was home to Alan and his wife, Yelissa, who were both of the Forrest clan. Their home and lands were as much a part of them as the blood that flowed through their veins. Alan loved the land, the forest, and especially their home. It was early morning, and he stood at the entrance to the cottage, breathing in the scent of dewdrops that covered the gardens and grounds. It looked a bit like tiny fairies with shimmering wings dancing about to wake all to a bright new day. Emerald green vines encased their cottage, wrapping around all sides, as a mother would clothe a small child. His father had added the arched windows that were evenly spaced, one facing front and a smaller one at each side and at the back. Yelissa kept the shutters thrown wide, allowing streams of sunlight into the rooms. The entrance was a beautiful, finely carved door that most times remained wide open to welcome their guests. Once the door lived in the forest, a mighty tree, a strong and faithful soldier, provided protection for birds, squirrels, and other of God's creatures. So said his great-grandfather, who had hewn the tree and created the wonderful thick door that now stood as a guard once more, protector for his family. Alan often stated that it was difficult to determine where the cottage ended and the forest began. The roof, a tapestry in variations of green, was laden with layers of moss. Here and there could be seen wisps of pink and white blooms. A gigantic tree with large branches loomed at the back corner of the cottage, a contrast in size, giving the cottage a dwarf-like appearance. As with the roof, so the tree trunk was wrapped in moss, with curly ferns adorning the trunk, and its limbs held a bounty of blue-green leaves. His daughter often said, "Look at the roots, Father. Don't you think they look like huge serpents? See how their tails trail around both sides of our home." He smiled as he stood back, looking toward the back. The roots did resemble something, maybe a dragon. More often, it was her favorite place, and when children came to visit, they could be heard slaying the mighty dragon. Alan always thought it appeared as though the cottage was part of the tree. Yelissa would say it is an entrance into its soul. To the left of the front door stood a heavily laden trellis of vines that wound around and up across their roof like fingers inside a glove. Hidden within the mass of green moss, he and Yelissa added an arbor that covered a portion of the path that wound around the cottage. Yelissa had planted similar flowers to those on the trellis, so that it now covered the arbor and fell in cascading purple bundles of foliage that, from a distance, resembled clusters of grapes. The aroma from the blossoms was so inviting that it enticed people to linger beneath the laden, perfumed branches. Alan sometimes wondered if Yelissa ever grew tired of the throngs that seemed to find their way to their door, but she was always welcoming. God sends those who are in need, and He gives us a way to help them in their need. He has given us so much. How can we refuse anyone who comes to our door? Alan was thankful she felt that way because it happened to be the way they first met. He had showed up at her parents' door in the dead of night in the middle of a ferocious rainstorm, one that had flooded a nearby lowland village. He and several of the clansmen worked most of the evening and well into the night, helping people float their household items and animals to higher ground. Yelissa's parents' home was well above the flooded area, and he knocked on their door to inquire if they could provide haven for some of the displaced people. He remembered the moment she opened the door. He had gone speechless until his friends gave him a sharp push. "I need help," he said. "I mean, these people need a place to stay if you have room. They escaped the floods, and the little ones are—" "Yes, please, come in, come in." Yelissa had already begun to pull the children into the house and usher them toward the fire at the far end of the room. Her mother welcomed the rest of the family as he continued to stare. These were the last of the people who needed help for the night, and as Yelissa and her mother continued gathering dry garments, Alan moved from the door to assist Yelissa's father in making tea and carving slices from a loaf of bread. When everyone was dry and it appeared there was nothing else to do, he thanked the family and was preparing to leave, when Yelissa's father insisted that he and his friends remained with them for the night. The loud sounds of thunder encouraged them to accept his hospitality. Alan laughed at the memory. It was not the loud clap of thunder that convinced him. It was that he could not help watching Elissa as she fussed over one guest and then the other. She was a willowy girl, but with strong arms, a wide smile, and long auburn curls that glistened in the firelight. Her eyes were a mystery, for he could not see if they were blue, green, or whatever, and he so wanted to know. Now he did know. They were sometimes blue and sometimes green, depending on her mood. Their daughter had her eyes. Alan walked around the corner of the cottage and surveyed the gardens. The birds were singing loudly and the sun was doing its job, drying the remaining drops of water from the leafy branches. Behind their cottage was a well-worn path that went past two smaller cabins that he and Elissa built for visitors or people in need. The path continued past the cabins, becoming lost to view, hidden by a wall of green foliage. Beyond the green could be heard sounds of rushing water from the streams that flowed through a steep, narrow gorge, forming frothy pools of crystal blue in a lagoon right below the banks of the cottage. The lagoon, he said, as memories of his childhood flooded in. He recalled when Aten, whom he had called the king's knight Aten, until both his mother and Aten convinced him it was not disrespectful to call him by his name, finally relented to Alan's constant begging that he swim with him in the lagoon. As the king's personal knight, I rarely have had opportunities for such things, Aten had said. Alan challenged Aten to a race. The loser must bring in wood for a whole week. He smiled because he knew a shortcut through the wall of green that would get him to the lagoon quickly. At the mark, they both headed out, and Alan quickly disappeared behind the wall of green, making his way down to the lagoon. He dived into the pool and was swimming in circles, proud that he had outrun Aten. As he floated on his back, he watched the large, dark-skinned man taking small steps, moving slowly toward the water. When he finally made it to the water's edge, he plopped down on the sand, carefully stuck his toes in the water, and then quickly drew his feet back out. Alan laughed and continued to call to him, "Come on! You are a king's knight, not afraid of anything. Just jump in." Aten yelled back, "The water is too cold. Besides, I am not a good swimmer." Alan could not believe what he was hearing. "Just jump in. You will warm up." Alan watched his mother making her way down the path toward the lagoon, and when she stood almost an arm's length from Aten's back, she said quite loudly, "Listen to the boy. Jump in." Alan laughed until he almost choked on a gulp of water. Aten had not realized his mother was present, and when he heard her voice, he jumped up so fast, spinning around, that he lost his balance and fell backward into the water, splashing, screaming, and trying to get his footing. His mother jumped in and grabbed his arm. "Aten, stand up. The water is only knee-deep here. Just stand up." Alan still recalled the fun and laughter of that day. It seemed that the weight of the loss of his father had been lifted. They all three swam and listened to the many stories Aten had to share of his life as a king's knight. Snippet of Chapter 1 of The Princess of Waterfall Castle, written by Pamela Causey Stanforth, published by Westbow Press. Pam is a member of our London Visual Arts Guild. She is a beautiful artist, and this is her first book. It is enchanting. It's a fairy tale, obviously, about castles, princesses, kings, and knights. She has made the book available. They are $13 for paperback. We can deliver it if you'd like it, or we can arrange a pickup at our site on appointment. $13. A portion of every purchase through our guild will go towards the guild. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Pam, for allowing us to spotlight you this week.